everybody. Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you on WJOPLP Newburyport at FM 96.3 on Channel 9 on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and today I'm happy to welcome social worker Lisa Dube back to the morning show. In 2020, I had the privilege of interviewing Lisa about transgender identities. So I invited her to return to the morning show today to share her perspectives and insights about recent developments regarding transgender care. As I'm sure you've all been reading about, in the past year, there's been an astonishing and very dismaying volume of bills blocking access to gender-affirming care for transgender youth that have been and continue to be introduced in red state legislatures across the country. The rapid rise of targeting transgender people, especially young people, has perplexed me, as I've no doubt it has perplexed and deeply concerned many of you. I couldn't think of anyone better to offer some perspective and some reflection and insights on what's happening better than Lisa. She's a licensed independent clinical social worker. She has a private practice called Merrimack River Wellness here in Newburyport, and she has a special focus on the unique therapeutic needs of transgender and gender expansive youth adults and their families, especially at the intersection of gender and neurodivergence. In addition, Lisa has completed the requirements to be a certified gender specialist with the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. Lisa, welcome to the morning show, and thank you so much for taking time to return.
Mary, thank you so much for having me, and I truly appreciate this opportunity because I think there is a lot of misinformation about what is happening. So I truly appreciate this opportunity.
Well, I appreciate having you here to help us out with your expertise. And I know that people are just hearing about what's going on with dismaying rapidity. I think it's just of deep concern to so many people. So, well, Lisa, I'm curious to find out what kind of anxieties about gender or other motives do you think are revealed by the targeting that's happening these days?
I think the primary issue is fear.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we live in a society that is what we would call cisnormative. So cisnormative means that we assume that people are cisgender, which means that their gender aligns with their sex assigned at birth. And as a result of that, when people deviate from that, it's often seen as a threat or scary to people who are part of that cisnormative sort of culture in society. And there are power structures as well that are part of cisnormativity. So I think there's several variables, but primarily the main one is that, again, we live in a cisnormative culture.
Yes, and as you point out, I think the focus on fear makes a lot of sense, because I think people fear what they don't understand or don't know very much about, but sometimes assume that they do. And I also think that people get afraid at some deeper level, and you can tell me if this is something that you agree with. I think sometimes when people perceive certain norms that are supported by systems, as you say, they get afraid that anything might be possible. And if anything is possible, what does that say about the rules and the guidelines that they may have structured their lives with? So I think it's scary in that sense too, that people may have suppressed aspects of themselves and uncomfortableness with their own gender roles and gender rules. And I think sometimes people just get afraid that if you throw out some of the rule books, that anything might be possible. And that's scary for people. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, we're also in a time where young people more than ever are really exploring and experimenting with their gender identity. And I think for adults and parents who perhaps grew up in a different generation where there wasn't that type of representation, that can feel scary. What does that mean for my child? There can also be, fear of, what is my loved one or family member's life going to be like as a transgender person?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, you've already mentioned misconceptions or misunderstandings. Lisa, what do you think are the greatest misconceptions or biases or misunderstandings that are fueling the political fires that are happening right now about transgender issues?
I think the largest one is this notion that there are many children under 18 having surgeries.
Mm.
It's just not accurate. It's very, well, first, gender affirming surgeries are not happening for people under age 18. There's one instance, perhaps, where top surgeries, which would be breast reduction, chest reduction, sometimes happens in transgender masculine individuals, usually not till age 16, but it is following a whole process of collaborative decision-making with parents, medical providers, and mental health providers. And it's following standards of care. And it's not entirely different from what's happening with plastic surgery with cisgender individuals who may want to have breast reduction surgeries prior to age 18 or rhinoplasty prior to age 18. So
Well,
the biggest,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
so the biggest one is that there's this common idea that surgeries are happening and they're not.
Well, I think that's such an important reality to underscore. It makes me think a little bit of all of the drama around people rushing to forbid teaching of critical race theory in younger grades when it's never been taught in younger grades. So it's like creating something to ban that isn't actually really happening. And yet, because of the fear level, as you know, we were talking about earlier, I think fear galvanizes attention. So let's just make note and underline again that the thing that people are most scared of isn't something that is actually happening. And in fact, as you point out, there's a lot of care. There's a process that people go through. So you were about to say something, Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add that a lot of people don't understand how this connects to intersex identities. And many people don't know that in our country, there are still surgeries happening with infants to, quote, correct intersex traits. And those individuals often are not having autonomy over their bodies. That's, to me, those are surgeries that should not be happening. Yet we are really focused on these other surgeries when we really could shift our attention to what's happening with intersex identities and sort of be outraged that those children and families often don't have a say in what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a strange juxtaposition. I did an interview with Kimberly Zeiselman, who's written a book, her memoir, which is very powerful, about the surgery she had, where surgeons actually lied to her about what was going on to the detriment of her health. I mean, she was fine. And she talked a lot about those surgeries. I think a lot of people don't understand that these are surgeries often happening on infants who certainly have no agency or no voice in it. Of course, fortunately, as with the work that you're doing, there is a lot of educational work happening now around intersex, and people are becoming, takes time, but people are becoming better informed. So fingers crossed that there's a better future in store. Well, let's talk about the harm that these bills are doing, whether they're fueled by fear, misconceptions, as they clearly are. They have an impact. They land on people. They affect people's lives. So could you talk about what your understanding or what you've been observing about the harm that's being done, not just in the states where these restrictions and this legislation is being filed, but also in places like Massachusetts, where the legislation is not happening here, but of course everybody's hearing about it. And so what effect do you think it's having both on families who are living in the red states where these legislation is being filed, and also in states like Massachusetts, where we're all hearing about it and very aware of what's in the air?
Well, in states where access is being restricted, the decision-making for bodily autonomy and self-determination is being taken out of the hands of parents, mental health providers, and medical providers. And it's being decided by legislators who really don't have, sort of the expertise to be making decisions about trans identities, and often have no sort of medical experience or understanding. So that would be number one. Number two would be, it creates fear. It increases incidence of violence.
Yeah.
Here in Massachusetts, although we're fortunate that families still have access to care, there have been incidents where the providers who are providing this care have been threatened. For instance,
Mhm.
Children's Hospital. So they've had to, now you can't go to their website and find, provider information because providers have been threatened.
Gosh, yeah.
Um, so it's instilling fear. It increases incidents of hate and violence. The other thing that I would add is that this idea that sort of gender affirming care is sort of an anomaly. If you look at all of the major medical organizations, more than 20 major medical organizations, including the American Academy of Child and Psychiatry, American Academy of Pediatrics, have all come out to say that gender affirming care is a best practice.
Yeah. Also important to underscore that because those are the knowledgeable people with the experience and the research on their side. And
Mhm.
that's what they're saying. So, let's just establish that. Um, but that said, there's a phrase that people are using now about a permission structure being created. And I think what you're describing in terms of the level of threat and the level of fear that's created for people who might extend this kind of care is that a permission structure is given by all the publicity around the red state legislatures,
Mhm.
where people pick up on that. And then it becomes an excuse or a validation for people to express their fears, sometimes through threats or active violence. And I've always remembered the statistics that in your prior interview you gave, Lisa, about the vulnerabilities of this population is self-harm and suicide. And I
Mhm.
could you remind us just of how dire the danger is for young people?
Well, the Trevor Project, which is an organization that does a lot of research and support for LGBTQ identities, I believe the recent figure is that 42% of transgender individuals who do not have family support have attempted suicide or self-harm. That number goes down to what it would be in the cisgender population when there is family support.
Mm-hmm.
So, all of these structures that create systems in which, individuals are not being supported, we know that lack of support is connected to harmful outcomes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just a heartbreaking statistic to learn about, and it certainly underscores the importance of providing support in whatever way we all can, including support to the family, so they can give support to the young people, because we don't, any of us exist in a vacuum. And speaking of support, then I wanted to ask you, as a therapist, Lisa, what kind of support, assistance, perspective do you try to offer?
I offer resources on my website. I offer groups for parents, multiple groups for parents whose children may have recently shared that they identify as trans or are exploring their gender. I work to make myself available to individuals and organizations who might have questions around this. I maintain my education with WPATH to ensure that I'm following the protocols and procedures around sound referrals and decision making. And I work to provide science and fact-based information to the people that I work with, because again, there is so much misinformation out there. And I think it is important to counter that with,
Mm-hmm.
again, fact-based information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, knowledge is power, and,
Yeah.
and knowledge is helpful. Um, so, well, Lisa, as a community member and as fellow citizens, what can we all do? What would make a difference in the lives of transgender people and their families that we could all participate in and support?
So I think the first thing is recognizing that if you are cisgender, that you have a lot of privilege. You don't have to think
Yeah.
about you don't have to think about your safety and your gender very much. So that would be, how can you use that privilege to support people who are part of the trans community, to take some of that emotional labor off of them? And so for me, that is when I hear something, when I see something, speaking up, not in a confrontational way, but just providing more fact-based information. So I think the first thing is speaking up.
Mm-hmm.
I think donating and supporting legal organizations that are working to combat anti-trans legislation, listening to and reading the stories of trans and LGBTQ people, and relying on lived experience for your information versus sort of media information that so often is not accurate. And then you can also share your pronouns. Sharing your pronouns helps to normalize and sends a cue of safety to people that you are a safe person. So
Interesting. Yeah.
people who are part of the LGBTQ community are constantly scanning the environment for signs and cues of safety.
Oh, that's really interesting, Lisa. I mean, more and more, people do share their pronouns or get asked what your pronouns are. I was at Anna Jake's lab recently, and part of what they do now, every time you check in, is double check on what are your pronouns. And of course, major employers also, as part of each employee's signature scan, will have the pronouns. But it's interesting and important that you point out that it's a signal. It's not just neutral information. It's an emotional signal as well. It signals, yeah, I'm somebody who's aware that there's a multiplicity of pronouns, and that part of our diversity is the pronouns that we identify with. And that's really helpful to understand the significance of that, as you point out, people who are looking for a sense of safety in trying to feel out what kind of person am I interacting, will they be likely to be biased, that's part of what they will take in, and that's a point of information for them that has some predictive value about the likelihood of finding understanding, support, and a non-judgmental receptivity. So thank you for that. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Well, Lisa, I'm curious to find out, are you hopeful? Are you optimistic? These are very, challenging times on many fronts. So I'd just like to know, how are you feeling about how things are going these days?
So I feel disappointed and I feel sad, but I also feel, and I heard this recently at a presentation that I attended, is that love always wins.
Ah, okay.
And so I've really tried to hold on to that mantra that this, at the end of the day, it's about love, and hold on to this belief that love will prevail. And that's, I'm really trying to hold on to that. And then, again, do some of the things that we talked about to increase awareness and allyship.
Love always wins in the end. I like that. It's a good thing for us all to remember. The other thing that I like to remember is a t-shirt. I think it's the ACLU commercials that are on TV all the time, where it says, "The we the people includes all of us." And so if we can bring love to we the people, to all of us people, then there's definitely hope, and we can the other phrase is, that this is familiarly said, we can become the change that we hope will take place now and heading forward into the future. Well, Lisa, I'd like to let people know about your website URL. Would you like to talk a little bit about what your website link is and what kind of resources people can find there?
Sure. My website is www.merrimackriverwellness.com, and that's MERRIMACKRiverWellness.com. No punctuation or spaces in the Merrimack River Wellness. What I try to do on my website is create information for families and individuals who either might be exploring their gender identity or just want to learn. So for individuals, there's resources around exploring gender. For families, there's a lot of resources, books, podcasts, articles about how to support a loved one who might be coming out as trans. You know, there's some information about the intersectionality with neurodivergent identities. So if somebody is autistic or ADHD, the likelihood that they might be transgender is greater. So there's some information about that. There's some safety information in terms of suicidality that is specifically for the trans community. And then I also practice from a modality called internal family systems, which is this idea that we all have parts. And so I have some links to that as well. So it would make sense that as parents and individuals, we might have parts that feel afraid or scared, again, around this issue of trans identities. And part of what I do is work with individuals and families around those parts that hold fear.
Yeah.
And to help them give space to those parts and to provide love and support, because it makes sense that, again, it goes back to that fear piece.
Yeah. It's just an abundance of resources. I think anybody who's interested in any of the things you've just talked about will find you'll be clicking steadily because there's much to be learned. So I also have to say, Lisa, that I found in your little bio, I came across the phrase gender expansive. And I just think saw it and I just started to breathe deeply when I read it. Gender expansive. It just reading the phrase itself feels liberating. So I just hadn't come across that phrase before. It's a great phrase, though, isn't it?
Yeah. When I think of gender expansive, you know, it's this idea that gender is not binary.
Yeah.
So even though I identify as a cisgender woman, there are times when I might present in the world in a way that isn't feminine.
Yes.
And we all have, you know, different aspects of ourselves. And I don't think that this idea that gender is one thing and that the rubric is, okay, you fall on this continuum and you're either this or that, that there's a whole continuum, just like there is with sexual orientation. And so this idea of expansiveness is that we can hold space for people's identities outside of the binary.
Yeah. And that we can be explorers and adventurers and enjoy the many kind of psychological and emotional and sensory opportunities that are available to us, excuse me, as full human beings. So gender expansive, everybody, take a deep breath. Well, Lisa, before we finish for the day, I also want to encourage people to seek out the extremely excellent, engaging, and informative 2020 interview that you gave to me on the morning show. So if people would like to learn more from Lisa, and believe me, you will, go to ncmhub.org, click on YouTube, then click on playlist and scroll down for the morning show and look up the episode for August 6th, 2020. Lisa, I can't thank you enough. It's been fun to talk to you again, especially at a time like this when your wisdom and your perspective and your emphasis on love and on freedom are so critically important. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary, so much for the opportunity.
It's been my pleasure and my privilege. Well, you take care now. Farewell, and thanks very much, Lisa.